Hey, everybody, you know what time it is. And welcome back to Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the bark.
and we have been here a long time. Bark, I don't know if you know this, but we're on season 5, episode dose. Ooh, hook 'em or down or whatever. Live your life. Hey, Bark, welcome back. Happy Thanksgiving. Delayed, of course. Did you guys enjoy it? Did you have a good time?
We did. We hosted. We had my brothers and my mom and Tara's mom and dad and her brother and his wife and their two little munchkins.
Nice.
And so I made a turkey. I would say that I'm a better preparer and cooker of a turkey than I am of a ham.
Oh, really?
So,
That's
yeah.
you. Good for you. Now, are you a bake, deep fry? What are we thinking here?
Old school oven. I watched my Gordon Ramsay video on how to prepare
Yeah,
my turkey the proper way. So Tara said, "Do you just like scream at it then? Like, is that how you prepare
yeah.
it?" This is
You're
Gordon
doing
Ramsay, but
terrible. Be a better bird.
no, you gotta, Anyway, I made myself a nice buttery like salve, and then put it in between the meat and the skin of the
Oh,
turkey.
like it. Nice.
So
Chef's kiss. Beautiful. Love it. Oh man, had a good one. We India went to her family down in Florida, and my buddy Chris came down from Montreal. Huge 49ers fan. Don't know why. But I got to take him to a game. He's never seen the Montreal, or he never and from Montreal. He's only seen one game. He's a huge Alouettes fan. I know that's what you were going with that smirk. And the Alouettes did take the Grey Cup, even though apparently they weren't supposed to. They were bad this year, but they knocked off. They were able to knock off Toronto in the semifinals and then beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers with 11 seconds left in the Grey Cup. So shout out to the Montreal Alouettes who do not listen to this podcast. And
but they should.
yeah, they really should. So he's a 49ers fan. He's seen one game. He's seen the Buffalo Bills play Cincinnati Bengals in Buffalo because obviously Montreal and Buffalo are fairly close. And so I did him a solid. I sold my season tickets in the upper deck and bought 2 seats in the 100 level, 22 rows up from the 50-yard line on the 49ers side so we wouldn't get any fights. Um, and just a cool experience, cool weekend. Took him hiking, walked around Seattle. It was just a good time. So we are back though, folks. And guys, I don't know if you're ready for this. I was gonna get a ginger snap cookie, and I just do not have a ginger snap cookie. But today we are going to talk about the one, the only, the Great Molasses Flood. Barker, take it away.
So travel with us back to the year 1919. Sherman and Peabody.
Ooh, love it.
Fun fact, I think I'm going to get a molasses cookie tomorrow at work from one of my department mates' wives because it was another dude's birthday today, and he said, "Hey, how about some cookies?"
Ooh.
Anyways, he had mentioned at PLC today maybe some molasses, some ginger snaps. So
Love that. Love that.
anyways,
Yeah.
my granddad used to always keep molasses or ginger snap cookies that were like harder than hockey pucks next to his rocking chair, and you'd have to really like work on them for a while.
That's why I put them with milk. You gotta float
Anyway,
them.
yeah, so the Great Molasses Flood. It happens in the north end of Boston, January 5th, or January 15th, sorry.
Yep.
Dates are hard. Um, Probably like it is for many of our listeners. Anyway, but yeah, we're talking about this Great Molasses Flood. It's one of those things you don't really think about. And like, if you're not aware of what molasses is, it is kind of I was talking about with my students the other day. It's like the diesel of sugar products.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the most unrefined, most unrefined finished product of sugar.
Yes.
And so like I was talking about, because I always talk about sugar cane, I talk about Columbian Exchange, and sugar cane comes from Indonesia, India, and all the way across the planet to the Caribbean and into like Brazil. And I'm like, it was the first crop that introduced a 24-hour work cycle. And I'm like, well, why? Why do you, well, it's got to be processed fast. And I was like, well, why? And it's because apparently if you cut sugar cane and leave it in the field cut, it actually like metabolizes or like absorbs the sucrose.
Oh,
And so like
you lose it.
goo that you squeezed out after you heat it is less sweet. So learn something new every day.
The more you know.
So anyways, a boat carrying a bunch of molasses from Cuba was bringing it to the north end of Boston. And they dumped, or dumped is the right word.
Pumped.
They pumped.
Yeah.
A heated amount of molasses into a storage container at the Purity Distillery on, I believe it's Commercial Street.
529 Commercial Street near Keeney Square.
Yeah. And so it was into it. They pumped it into this tank that was 50 feet tall, 90 feet wide. And the next, like, it was pumped a couple days prior. But on the 15th, this tank ruptures and releases 2.3 million gallons of molasses. And I could not find anything that told me what a good comparison of 2.3 million gallons was. But you think about 2.3 milk jugs.
So I have an idea for this one. So I worked at Wild Wave Theme Park. The wave pool held, if I remember correctly, I think it held 500,000 gallons of water. So a wave pool, right, at an amusement park held 500,000 gallons of water. So you're talking 4 times that amount? Almost 5 times that amount?
Almost 5 times that. That's a lot of molasses.
Yes.
They estimate that it traveled at speeds of 35 miles an hour.
Which, let's be real, adds a new meaning to the phrase slower than molasses.
Yeah, not apt. It's almost like healthy as a horse or low man on the totem pole.
Yep.
And it created a 15-foot wave as it smashed through the north end of Boston on its way to the harbor. So yes, not only did they spill the tea in the harbor, but then,
it needed sugar.
160 years, 150 years later, they added molasses. So maybe it's just fitting that we just dump random things into the harbor.
Into Boston Harbor specifically.
Yeah. And it left the majority of the north end under 2 to 3 feet of molasses. And so, like, if you've ever opened a jar of molasses, I mean, I don't know if any of our younger listeners are out there, but those of us that are a little bit more experienced in life,
yep.
Molasses is a pretty sticky substance. And so, like, it ended up, what was the death toll? It killed
21 people and injured 150.
Yeah, and of the victims
and multiple horses.
Yes, there was victims as young as 10, which are school children that I think were on lunch break, if I remember right.
They're walking home, I believe.
Okay.
It says, walking homeward from their school, because the actual, lunch makes more sense though, because it collapses at 12:30 p.m. So, yeah, okay, so we'll call it, they were walking home from school at some point, whether it be lunch or whatever.
Yeah, and so, like, the big question is, like, how does this happen? And a lot of it comes down to, it's science. I think they said the temperature that day was 40 degrees. And temperature change, like, when things are warm and then when they become cold and get more viscous or more solidish, because I don't think molasses really becomes a solid.
I don't think so. But, like, my mom who watches this video will probably put in the comments. So if Patty Turner comments correcting us, that's a believable statement. And Rose, one of the things to add to it, right? So the previous day's temperature was 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the day of January 15th, the temperature rose to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So significant heat, obviously, as Barker is saying, significant expansion.
Yeah, and so, like, the container that was built to hold the molasses was quickly built, was not certified in the way that it needed to be. It wasn't put under a full stress test. We were talking before we started recording that the seams of it would leak so bad that people were like, "Hey, that's leaking," to the point that the people that owned the distilling company just painted it brown.
Yep. And small children or like townspeople knew it leaked, so they would go and bring buckets and fill their buckets full of molasses from the leak, and then they would take it home for personal use.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of crazy, and like the accounts that people had given, the majority of the people like, so people either died of like blunt force trauma because like there's this giant like tsunami of molasses that comes
Yep.
at you, or they suffocated because like they described it as like the people were stuck in the molasses like flies stuck on fly paper,
Yep.
right? And like as it cools, you heat it up, it becomes more liquid, and then as it cools, it's going to turn like it's going to become more
Denser.
of a syrup,
Yeah,
right?
denser. Yep.
Yeah, it's going to become more dense. Thank you. Um, and so like after it happened, it right floods through the streets, it crushes stuff, people are in disarray, and the firefighters show up and they're trying to find ways to they're trying to figure out how to get rid of all of the molasses. Like, what do we do? And like, there was even accounts that like hog farmers from the outskirts of like Boston came with like buckets because they thought they were just going to scoop up a bunch of molasses and like take molasses home to feed their hogs. But the best thing to do, the best remedy was to actually use salt water instead of fresh water.
Yep.
For some reason, the salinity of the salt water allowed it to cut through the molasses. And with the mentality of the time period, they essentially just washed it all into the ocean.
Yep.
Like everybody kind of just thought, if you've ever done like a Seattle tour where they talk about like early Seattle and Tacoma, we're like, all the sewers just flushed right into the sound. Um, like everybody just thought of like waterways as like the nature's like garbage disposal.
Yep.
And so I read an article that compared it. There was a 2013 molasses leak in Hawaii
Oh, really?
that, yeah, it only leaked 233,000 gallons
Only.
only. But it had a dramatic impact on like the seagrass and like the sea life near where the spill happened. Because people during that time didn't do like ecological research. Like they didn't
Right.
have the ability to like go and like measure, oh, what's the impact on the sea urchins of the Boston Harbor?
Yeah.
And so what they found in Hawaii was that the animals that were able to moved. And then like things like seagrass that aren't able, like just by physiology, like don't
Yeah. They can't move.
matriculate,
Yeah.
suffered the biggest impact. And I mean, again, that was 233,000 gallons,
Yeah.
which is like, I think if I can do math, is no, it's not even. Is it 10%?
It's 10% because it's 2.3 million.
Yeah.
So 230 would be 10%. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
10% of the leak, like so, like think about like the ecological like impact that it had on Boston Harbor that we really haven't even like researched because like nobody had the ability to back at that time.
yeah.
And like some people even early speculation was that anarchists had blown up or like caused the tank to fail because they disagreed with the fact that the 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 molasses was being distilled to make ethanol or
Alcohol.
yeah
It would go into alcohol basically.
yeah so it either make alcohol or it could be used in munitions.
Yeah. And so that's where the anarchist plot comes in.
Yeah, which has never been substantiated.
No, never. And it was pretty quickly disproven from what I understand. Like the company said it was anarchist, and then everyone's like, no. Yeah.
You built this in a hurry. There was a class action lawsuit against U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company. They settled for $628,000, which in 2022 money is $10.6 million. and it came out to roughly 7,000 per
victim.
claimant.
And what's interesting is this is actually one of the first class action lawsuits in Massachusetts at the time, and led to a little bit stricter safety standards when it came to building. Basically, going through this and looking at the building part of that tank, it was never tested fully. It was, like we said earlier, like they said they knew it had a leak in it, so they knew it wasn't. And one of the interesting things is that this has been studied actually pretty well. And one of the things that they looked at was I'm trying to remember who it was. Somebody did a test on it, and they said that 2014 investigation took a modern engineering analysis and found that the steel that built the tank was half as thick as it should have been for a tank with that size, even for the low standards at the time. So it was like it was shoddy workmanship from the get-go. And like Barker said, one of the things that happens in this cleanup is the first thing is like a rescue mission. And so they're trying to get these people, trying to take care of them. And the first ones to show up to the scene are 116 cadets under the direction of Lieutenant Commander H.J. Copeland from the USS Nantucket, which is a training ship for the Massachusetts Nautical School, which is now the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, that was docked off nearby. They plunged headfirst into the fray, trying to help people and pull them out, and then also keep crowd control. The police, Boston Police, the Red Cross, the Army, the Navy, all show up, and then nurses from the Red Cross are trying to save people that are in the molasses. They're providing food for the workers. They're trying to do everything. But one of the things that was interesting, like you said, with the molasses getting colder, was that many of the dead actually are so glazed over with sugar and molasses that they're almost unidentifiable.
Yeah, well, that's also because a number of them aren't found immediately. Like the recovery time, it takes weeks. I went through. I think it was the Boston Globe has like a list of what do you call them, like eulogies for like a quick little write-up for like every victim.
Yeah.
And so I went through and I was writing down like the ages, and I was kind of reading the stories. But yeah, a number of them were not recovered immediately, and it took days because they were, like, again, this wave of molasses went through, and like, again, building code at this time isn't very high, just like it wasn't for the material, this tank. And so like it's smashing buildings with people in them, and then people getting caught up in that with the animals. And so like as everything kind of like comes apart, like they make a list of like missing people, and then eventually like do their best to kind of like match who they find with the people that are listed as missing. I mean, and so it's in this time period of kind of like rampant entrepreneurship with maybe not as much government regulation and safety, like public protection as there needed to be. And like today, it's really interesting because like today it's actually a park.
Yeah.
Like where the accident happened, it's I might pronounce this wrong because I'm not from Boston. Lagoni Park. It's got a baseball field, a playground, and a bocce court. Is what's there today. And they actually say that the concrete pad that the tank was built on is actually underneath the baseball field. I think it's
really?
Yeah, so it's kind of neat, but it's also kind of neat that they've taken it and turned it into like a public space.
Yep.
For like the good of the community.
Yep.
And it's led to, they've said that for years afterwards that the north end of Boston on a hot summer's day would smell like molasses.
Yeah.
And being from a paper town in Washington, on a hot summer day, if the worst thing your town can do is smell like molasses, like you shouldn't complain.
Yeah.
Because if you've never smelled a paper mill
Uh,
on a good day,
yeah.
yeah, molasses isn't that bad. Or Quincy with its the
Yeah.
smell of whenever they're processing like grain kernels and it's
Yeah.
corn kernels and it smells like burnt no bake cookies,
Yeah.
which is just as confusing as it sounds. And then the pink snow happens. But
Yeah. The pink snow.
uh,
God.
um, yeah, this was really neat. And I mean, like, it's kind of like it's terrible on the one hand, right? Because 21 people lost their lives, 150 people got injured.
Yeah.
But like you think about like these industrial accidents where it's like you wouldn't think of molasses as being dangerous.
No.
And I know that there's another example my brother was looking at. It was on a calendar I think he had from the History Channel that was talking about there was a beer flood in like a town in like
Yep.
England.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
you know what I mean? And it's like, and I think there was just not too long ago in Italy there was a wine
Food flood. Yep.
distillery, yeah, where they had a flood of wine. So I mean, like, it's a thing that does happen. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like things fail. Like, do you have a contingency plan?
Yeah.
Nobody has a contingency plan for how to deal with 2.3 million gallons of molasses.
Well, and then what's cool is like you might be sitting there and you're like, you know what, like come on, like how do we know it was 35 miles an hour? Like how fast the molasses was going? How do we know how high the wave was? You know, all these things. This was the probably one of the coolest things is that like, and again, not cool that some people lost their lives, people were injured, but it's an interesting theory, right? Like at 2016, there were a team of scientists and students at Harvard that conducted studies of the disasters. So they gathered the data from the newspapers, the old maps of the city, what things would have looked like, the weather reports, but then they also created a kind of a scale model and they flooded it with corn syrup and cold corn syrup to see if it would do the same thing. And their research concluded that the high speed was credible. Like it would or could have gone that fast. And so it was so interesting to me that like even today, well, not today, but 7 years ago, we're still looking into this as like, how is this possible? What would this look like? Right. Just because again, like my joke that I was trying to make, but I'm not as funny as I think I am, right? Is like the one thing would be like my dad would tell me like you're going as slow as molasses in February, right? Being that molasses is thick, it doesn't go very fast. There was enough of this explosion to go 35 miles an hour. And I challenge you and post it a video, tag us in it on Instagram. We'll call it the Molasses Challenge. I want you to open a jar. I want you to turn it upside down in molasses. I just want to see how long it takes for the molasses to get to the counter. Let me know. Hashtag molasses challenge.
Yeah, and there was some talk in the material that I was reading that was talking about because of the density of molasses, it has a great like there's a large amount of potential energy like stored within it, and then like to be released all of a sudden, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got to go somewhere, and it's going to take the path of least resistance, which means streets and alleys,
Yep.
and just like pushing everything down those alleyways that it can. So
40% denser than water. So,
and it's kind of interesting to think about like that we don't know the impact that it had on Boston Harbor, but obviously it wasn't like a death blow because there's still sea life there. So it's in a way it's kind of amazing to see how nature just kind of like
nature finds a way.
Yeah, well I guess oil or molasses spill doesn't quite have the negative environmental impacts of an oil spill, thank goodness.
Yeah, fair. That's fair.
Yeah, this was an interesting topic to look at. I was intrigued and I was kind of like, well, how does that happen?
Yeah. How does it happen? How does it? Yeah. Why are like you think of a Great Molasses Flood? And it's like, well, everyone can outrun it. It's molasses. So interesting stuff. All right. Well, guys, thanks for listening. Perfect timing. Until next, Barker. Anything else?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Hey, congrats to Longview or our Longview. Congrats to RA Long, sorry, on their hot start on their basketball season, men's basketball season. So Good job. And well, if there's nothing else, until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bart.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And by golly, you just be well.